Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Live here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the finest first-person shooters that you can get on your Nintendo Switch. I've always been a huge fan of FPSs. I believe I started with GoldenEye 007 on the N64, and naturally, of course, I was too young for it, but I played it anyway, and moved on to today, where I ordered an Xbox Series X just to play Halo Infinite, which I could play on my Xbox One. And it hasn't arrived yet. And just to be absolutely clear, we're only going to be talking about first-person shooters, no third-person shooters or top-down or anything like that. So this, but not this. Got the list of games here, and as we always do, we're going to randomize it because it makes it slightly more interesting, and hopefully it'll break up one of the series that we have about 4 or 5 entries for. You know the one. And randomize, and there we go. We are starting with one that I don't have any footage for, and I'm waiting on a colleague to send some over. Marvelous. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. Starting things off, we have Journey to the Savage Planet, which kicks the old-fashioned notion of shooters all being grey and brown, and whilst that's definitely not as true these days as it was in like the 360 days, this really goes above and beyond. But whichever way you slice it, it's just a joy to run around and enjoy the world for what it is. And it also introduces some like platforming mechanics and stuff like that. Nothing like out of this world, but still, that's something that's really quite hard to do, certainly from a first-person perspective, when doing a shooter. And they've done it right. Naturally, because this is the Switch version, it is lacking a little bit of polish in the visuals department, but you can take it on the go. You can play this on the toilet. And you can't really do that with the other versions without doing some serious infrastructure changes. Next up, we have Super Hot. Now, this is a game that I always think is so much younger than it actually is. This game, it's not old, but it's not exactly new either. If you aren't aware, the gimmick of this game is that time only moves when you move. And there is it does move extremely slowly when you're not moving to stop you from just leaving it on for hours or breaking the game. But it still feels just as fresh as when it first came out. It's like the perfect gimmick because it really changes up everything about the game, and yet it doesn't feel like it ever overstays its welcome either. Probably helps that it's not a tremendously long game. So take a few hours out of your life, dive into this one. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. It's time for a classic. Yes, Doom 2016, or just Doom, but we're giving it that name because, you've probably worked it out. This is like the original Impossible port on the Switch. We've had loads since, obviously, and they are all fantastic. But this was, when this first came out, this was mind-blowing. It was the full Doom 2016 experience on the Switch. And yeah, it only runs at 30 frames a second, and yeah, it's a little bit soft. In fact, it's quite soft in a lot of places, but it's the full Doom experience on what is essentially a mobile phone. That's what the Switch is, on like a hardware level. It's a blinking mobile phone. I love this game. I played it to completion on the Xbox One originally, and then I picked up this version, and in some ways, I actually slightly prefer it. There's something sort of a little bit more old school about the soft visuals. It is invariably and undeniably objectively worse graphically, but there's something warm and fuzzy and something very reassuring about looking at something that invokes the kind of smeariness that I remember from N64 games. It's not that bad, but you know what I mean. It invokes a memory. It's one of those games that's always going to be really quite expensive for the Switch, but I still highly recommend you look into it because, oh my god, it's Doom 2016. It's rampant, rampaging fun, shooty demons. Good. Next up, we have Metro Last Light Redux. Now, this is the second game in the Metro series, of course, but the other one's on the list as well, spoilers. This is a really solid port of an original first-person shooter, and it runs really, really well on the Switch. There's nothing to say that it shouldn't run well on the Switch, but it does. And that's, with recent releases, that's only a good thing. You'll be running around and shooting in a post-apocalyptic Moscow, mostly in the Metro system, but not entirely. The original, you were only in the Metro, only in the Underground, and now you get to go to the surface. And I'm not as keen on the surface stuff, I don't know, but you know, I still think it's a fantastic game, and the Redux version, it definitely helps to sort of like iron out a few of the wrinkles, but you know, Last Light was a much more polished experience when it came out compared to the original game, so the change isn't quite as dramatic here, but it's still a really good time. And if you're looking at this and you like sort of survival horror elements and, you know, running around and shooting and things, cool, blimey, you can do an awful lot worse. Next up we have Doom 2, the sequel to Doom, not to be confused with Doom Eternal, which is the sequel to Doom. What can I say? This game has been around for donkey's years, it's available on the Switch, and it runs beautifully. There were a few issues when it first came out, but they have been ironed out. You know, issues with like connecting your Bethesda.net account, and that was just, yeah, nobody wanted that. Except Bethesda, I suppose. But as it is right now, it is just a fantastic way to play one of the original classic Doom games, and it's affordable, and it's just a great time. It's not going to last you forever, but if you want to, this game can absolutely kick your ass if you play it on one of the higher difficulties, and that's how I like it. Next up, and in a largely similar vein, we have Dusk. Now, this is actually a new game, but it's made in the style of the first-person shooters from PCs in the 90s, and I absolutely adore the look of this. It's not going to be for everyone, but for me, it invokes such a ridiculously specific part of nostalgia in my brain that it just makes me go gooey, which is ironic because you'd usually have to run a game like this in DOS. And what's more, the game is just fantastically good fun. It really leans into its sources and, you know, it's not shy about its inspirations at all, but it kind of wears that on its sleeves. It doesn't take itself super seriously, but then occasionally something semi-sinister will happen and it sort of makes you go, ooh, okay, now I'm, a little bit more invested now. It's not just completely silly scarecrows chasing you with a shotgun. If you've seen people hyping this game up, there's a good reason for it. It's blooming good. It's really blooming good. I thoroughly recommend you give it a go. Next in line is Crysis Remastered. Can the Switch run Crysis? We've all heard that joke before. But the thing is that the answer is yes. Yes, it can. And Crysis, whilst it may be, not necessarily the most fantastically well-remembered first-person shooter from a gameplay perspective, it's still really good fun, and this has ironed out a lot of the wrinkles that the original had, and, it runs on a bloomin' Switch. That's impressive in itself. There are a few rough edges, but if you can look past them, you've got a really, really good FPS here. It's a little bit melodramatic at times, but I still really enjoy it. The story's fun, driving around is fun, shooting's fun, going invisible is really fun. This game was so far ahead of its time that it's still a great laugh today. Oh, does this count as one game or three? It's Bioshock The Collection. If you know anything about me, you know I bloomin' love Bioshock. This contains Bioshock, Bioshock 2, and Bioshock Infinite. Now, Bioshock 2's okay, I enjoy it, but it's definitely not on par with the other two, and even then, the original Bioshock is obviously the best, because that's the one I played first and I'm biased. But this is worth it for the first game and Infinite alone. They are just fantastically good fun. And Bioshock 2 is still good. It is not bad, but it just, all the time I'm playing it, I'm like, oh, I wish I was playing Bioshock 1. The original Bioshock is just an absolute masterpiece in my view. If you've never played it before, I thoroughly encourage you to go and play it now. And this collection also comes with Bioshock 2, which is a perfectly good game. You get to play as a Big Daddy, and Bioshock Infinite, which is a fantastic game as well, and really pushed the systems that it came out on to their limit. And as a result, it runs really well on Switch. And just talking about it makes me really want to go back and play it. And I think I might. Moving on, we have Crysis 3 Remastered, the one with the bow. This, unsurprisingly, definitely takes a lot of notes from the original Crysis, but it's a much tighter experience overall. Things feel a little bit more sort of refined and a little bit more organized, and a little bit less experimental, shall we say? There's no jokes about can it run Crysis 3 about anything, but if there were, oh yeah, the Switch can, but it's still a fantastic game. I really enjoyed my time with it, and the bow especially definitely sort of changes the dynamic and makes you much more likely to go for a stealth angle. I mean, obviously you could do that in the previous two games, but this one really gives you way more options, and I like that. I like stealth gameplay when it's not actually forced upon you and you fail as soon as you're seen. Looking at you, Spider-Man. Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. It still surprises me that we don't have the original Wolfenstein. I say the original Wolfenstein, the original reboot of Wolfenstein on Switch, but we've got this one, and you know what? It's a bloody good time. I think it'd be fair to say that this is a very intense game, and it is, and it deals with certain issues that are a little bit delicate for some people, but I think it goes about it in the right way, in the fact that you spend most of the time shooting the evil people that I won't say the name of because YouTube. It's over the top, ridiculous, and just balls to the wall, really good fun, really intense. It has a few issues when it comes to the difficulty curve, but they are relatively forgivable. And overall, you know, when it comes to the end of it, it's still a bloody good game. Moving on, we have Doom 3, which you might think, oh, it's just another classic Doom game, but this one went for a very, very, very different angle, as you can, well, hopefully tell. This is much more of a sort of, in a way, sort of like a horror game, sort of horror survival kind of thing. I suppose think of it a little bit like Resident Evil in some ways, crossed with Alien, but at the same time, not either of them. This was another one of those PC games that would just break people's machines. I mean, not literally, obviously, but it was like, oh, I can run Doom 3 and it can run it really well. It had all this, all this wonderful lighting going on and things like that, and they weren't shy about showing it. And the Switch version runs bloody well. We really have come a long way. It's undeniably a very different experience to the first two Doom games, but it is still a really, really good time. Definitely a different beast, but still a handsome one. Even if you can hold a torch and shoot at the same time now. Haha, ambidextrousness. Next in line, it's Crysis 2 Remastered, which is the second Crysis game. We really have been spoiled with these swathes of FPS series coming to Switch, being remastered and just looking great. But Crysis 2, it's like Crysis 1, but a bit more like Crysis 3, but kind of in between at the same time. Anyone would think it was the second in the series. I don't know if it's just a personal thing or whether, again, because it's a little bit tighter overall, but I actually think this runs better on Switch than the original Crysis, and is kind of tied with Crysis 3. Maybe there's a reason for that, something to do with the engine or something. I don't know, I don't make games. Nobo, of course, that was introduced in Crysis 3, but even so, this is still a cracking good game, and it's another Crysis game. Again, it's definitely not the kind of sort of open game that Crysis was, and in some ways that's a bad thing, but in some ways I think it does kind of refine things a little bit. It's a different experience overall, but not a bad one. I'd even go so far as to say it's a good one. That's why it's on this list. Next up, we have the free-to-play Paladins, which immediately makes me go blah when I hear free-to-play. But I actually really enjoy this game. On the face of it, it looks like it could be any number of free-to-play first-person shooter games, and yeah, kind of to a degree, but at the same time, it's just kind of good fun. It's very replayable, very engrossing at times, much more than I ever thought possible, and you don't really have to spend any money, and that's the most important thing for me, because I think the only time I've ever spent money on a free-to-play game was Pokemon Go, and that's just because I bought some Pokeballs because I'm an idiot. That's a $5 I'll never get back. More importantly, it runs beautifully on the Switch, 60 frames a second constantly. I haven't noticed any major drops in the time that I've played it. It's just a bloomin' good game. It's almost exclusively online. There's, really no point in playing it offline, although I think you can do like some practice mode, which don't bother. And it is definitely better to be played with friends or people you know. Arguably a lot like most first-person shooters, at least online ones. Because the offline ones, they can just watch, I suppose. If you're half interested, I'd recommend downloading it for free, giving it a go, and if it's not your thing, drop it. Simple. Next up, we have Doom, not to be confused with Doom 2016. The original Doom in all its glory. And unsurprisingly, just like Doom 2, it runs splendidly on Switch, and it's just a really good port. I'm not going to hang around any longer on it than that, because it's just Doom. It's just Doom. Everyone's played it. It runs on anything. It's good. It's fun. I like it. Next in line is Quake. Now, if you don't know what Quake is, it was basically the successor to Doom way back when, if you can believe it. Unsurprisingly, then, it takes a lot of cues from the older games, but obviously, look at it, it's in 3D. Ooh, 3D. not 2D. Joking aside, this is a phenomenal game. And this remaster is beautifully done as well. It's 60 FPS locked across the board. You're going to be running around shooting all the things without dropping a single frame, which you would expect. But again, it's just nice to say that they've done it and done it right. What's more, there's online, there's co-op, there's even mod support, and there's even like a brand new expansion that they made that's completely new and never been released before. How mad is that? I mean, this is a 25-year-old game, and they're making new content for it and releasing it. It's just crackers. Slipping on by, we have Metro 2033 Redux. Now, this is the original Metro game with the Redux thing, which means it's had a load of stuff from Last Light thrown in, which makes it overall a much smoother experience. I mean, there's something strangely charming about old games when they have clunky things about them, but realistically, I'd rather play a more refined version of a game as long as it doesn't change the spirit, and I don't believe it does. As suggested earlier, you'll be running around the metro in Moscow, and all manner of nasty things have happened, meaning that the human race is struggling to survive. You don't go on the surface in this one, which means that it's a little bit more limited in scope, but in some ways, it makes it a little bit more, especially with the horror aspects, it makes it a little bit more claustrophobic and more effective as a result. I myself am semi-claustrophobic, which means I don't enjoy some aspects of this game, but I don't enjoy the bits that they intentionally don't want me to enjoy, which makes it very effective, and as a result, I kind of love that. In a weird, twisted way, I like not liking those bits. Seriously good fun, original setting, the storyline's a lot tighter than the sequel as well. I'd heartily recommend it. And ultimately, we have Borderlands Legendary Collection. It's another 3-in-1. In this collection, you get Borderlands, Borderlands 2, and, well, not Borderlands 3, because it's, well, a relatively recent release, and it's probably just as well because you definitely wouldn't be able to read the bloody text on it. No, the third game in this collection is Borderlands the pre-sequel. Now, I have a very mixed feeling of emotions around Borderlands. I love the gameplay loop, just running around collecting loot, shooting things, going around doing all these sort of things left, right, and center. It's just good, cathartic fun. But the voices and the narrative and the humor, can't bloody stand it. It's just a personal thing, but it should really say a lot when I'm still saying that this is one of the best FPSs on Switch, because the actual gameplay loop is just mwah. The original game is definitely showing some growing pains. Borderlands 2 is really, really good, really refined everything that made the original great, and did definitely make the story actually, you know, made it so you could follow it. And I really like the pre-sequel as well. The low-gravity stuff was a little bit divisive amongst fans, but I enjoy it. I think it's good. All in all, a great collection of 3 fantastic games. If the humor's your cup of tea, you have at it, my friend. If not, I'm sure, like me, you can get over it. And lastly, we have the Big Daddy. Yes, it's Doom Eternal. This is the game, isn't it? Because, yeah, the original Doom 2016 was made, you know, it was ported to the Switch and everything, and, you know, it was incredibly impressive. But Doom Eternal was actually made with the Switch in mind. I mean, not completely, because it still came out a hell of a lot later than the other platforms, but even then, this is still a seminal game. I can't believe how well this game runs. Some people will be looking at this and going, oh, well, I could run it at 4K and 120 hertz on my machine that cost 50 grand. And yes, fair enough, but you know what? This tiny little console, this little piddly thing, you can get a Switch Lite, something that looks like a child's toy, and you can run Doom Eternal on it, and it plays brilliantly. How the hell did this even happen? I think it's undeniably one of the most technically impressive ports on Switch. Yes, I know, Nintendo and first, you know, games that are designed for the Switch, like through and through, they maybe are more technically impressive from an objective point of view. But this is a port. This is a game that has been, you know, developed and then put on the Switch. It wasn't developed for the Switch. It was developed and then put on the Switch. That's incredible. Can't praise it enough, because it's also just bloody good fun. I love Doom 2016 as well, but I have a hard time going back to it now because it's so much slower than Doom Eternal. It's quite different in many sort of small ways, but overall, I think it is just absolutely spectacular. I love it to death. I really, really love it to death, and it is probably my favorite first-person shooter on the Switch. Just watch your back if Halo ever comes over, though. And there you have it. That is our selection of what we believe to be the finest first-person shooters available to download, or indeed just play generally on the Nintendo Switch. Did we miss your favourite? Is there something that we absolutely should have included? Are you watching this in the future, where you're gonna leave a comment saying that Doom Eternal 2 wasn't included? We get those? Let us know with a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you get that subscribe button in your crosshairs and shoot it. And be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye. First proper time using the new setup. Wowzers! And I'm wearing orange. It's appropriate. Somehow.